Redditors who work in retail, what's the saddest thing someone ever returned? I was working at a large pet store in the tropical fish department. One busy weekend a very well-dressed, rather snobby woman came in and bought 6 baby angelfish, each about the size of a dime, plus the fins. The store I worked in was inside a huge high-end shopping mall, so we had a holding service where we would bag up fish, cash the customer out, and float the fish in their bags in a warm tank until the customer was finished all their shopping and ready to leave for home. As a matter of course, I offered to hold this lady's baby angelfish. She said she was all good and left. We thought nothing of it, since many of our customers came in from outside the mall just to stop at the pet store and didn't bother visiting the rest of the mall. 4 or 5 hours later, she stormed back into the store demanding a manager and a refund. She was shaking the bag in our faces for emphasis, yelling that her gorgeous angels were all dead. On close inspection, we discovered that the silly beach had put the poor fish in her car, presumably so she didn't need to carry them while she shopped for other things or returned to the store to pick them up. Unfortunately, because it was January and the temperature outside was about -15°C, the tiny babies had frozen to death. She simply couldn't wrap her head around the idea that tropical fish cannot withstand freezing temperatures, even when we took a tiny fish out of the bag and showed her that not only had ice formed on top of the 184°F water, but the dime-sized fish was actually frozen stiff. Some people just shouldn't have pets. Nobody will see this, but I'm on the other side of the coin. Here. Last fall, my dad decided to finally get his hearing checked and assessed for hearing aids. He really needed them. He wanted to be able to hear his first grandbaby, my daughter, coo and babble, when she was born in January. Unfortunately, the ones that worked the best for him were outside the budget he and my mom could afford. Husband and I decided Santa would gift them to him. He cried. His new ears gave him a new lease on life. He was happy, chatty and interactive during family get-togethers because he could actually hear everyone else enough to participate. Fast forward to January, and he is the happiest, most doting of grandpas. He was the first person to hold her after my husband. Dad started feeling sick in February. He died on April 12, 2016. Baby was just 10 weeks old. My mom has been largely unable to handle things in the wake of his death. Among all of the other things that I've handled for my family, because it's just too hard on everyone else. Mom asked if I would do something with his ears. I ended up calling the hearing aid shop and asking if they knew of any donation program where someone could benefit from the use of his ears. We actually ended up donating them to an elderly woman who was having difficulty communicating with her family and couldn't afford new ears of her own. Dad would have liked that. I like to think she can hear her grandbabies giggle and laugh. Now, I have declined the opportunity to meet her. I don't think my heart could take it. Not yet, anyway. I work in customer relations for a luxury car dealership. I get basically paid to interact with customers and make them feel more at ease during the buying and servicing of their vehicle. That being said, I get to know and like a lot of our customers, so one day last year around Halloween we had a young family come in looking for an SUV since the wife was pregnant and the husband had just gotten a huge promotion. They had a kid already that was around 4, if I remember correctly, and were just actually cool as people. I actually spent a lot of time getting to know them through their buying process and was excited to have this family get their dream car. Fast forward to this August and I see their SUV out in the parking lot. When you work at a dealership you learn your favorites, plates and cars. Or I'm a faking freak. Both are possible. I ask around and no one is services working with them. So I ask our sales manager, thinking they're switching into the redesigned model of the SUV. We'd talked about it when they bought their car. He gave me an uneasy look and said it was the wife's mom and I should talk to the sales guy. Weird, but okay. I find the sales guy and he's also uneasy, but after a few minutes tells me to go to the back office and he'll fill me in. Apparently the husband lost his sheet and ended up shooting himself and his wife a few months prior. She had just had the baby and I suppose that stressed him out. Her mom was called when the toddler went to a neighbor and said his parents were messy and still sleeping. Basically the mom was there to see if we could buy the vehicle back after getting everything else taken care of, which we did. TLDR, cooler's family came in and bought an sub, and less than a year later husband lost his sheet and killed his wife. Mom of wife had to return the sub. Also sorry I've been drinking all day. Sorry for words and grammar and rambling. I worked for a relatively sizable retail chain that operates primarily in the southeast USA. Our primary demographic is women 40 to 65, but we have a pretty extensive men's section with some pricey shit, Calvin Klein, Michael Kors, stuff like that. I'm a 20-year-old trendy-ish dude, and like at least 75% of my shirts and pants come from that place, so it caters to all sorts. Anyway, I had a woman come in one afternoon and was very snippy to both me and the manager working that day. She plopped about $80 worth of men's clothing on the counter and asked me to return it and give her the cash back. No problem, she had the receipts and everything. She rather rudely asked me where the large men's shirts and pants were, and when I told her I was unfamiliar with the exact layout of the men's department, I was a cashier and almost never left the front, she rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath and proceeded to accost my manager for their location. When she came back up to the front, I tried to be as jovial as I could and asked her if she was buying for her husband. She responded that no, she was buying for her son. Apparently, he was almost 30 years old, still lived at home, no job, and had recently outgrown his XXL pants and underwear, and she needed to find some 3X. She mentioned that he didn't really leave the house much and relied on her to do his shopping because he had attempted suicide a few months previously and since then had become even more of a recluse than he had before. She got misty-eyed and stopped talking rather abruptly. I normally hate being the guy who brings up his mental illnesses in public. It just makes everyone involved uncomfortable. I avoid the topic like the plague, unless it's with my partner or a very close friend. But I felt like she needed to hear some words of reassurance. I told her that 2 years previously I was in a place just like her son. That I was a shut-in with no ambition, had pretty crippling depression, and struggled a lot with self-harm. I also mentioned that I had attempted suicide a year or two previously. Her hand was on the counter, so I lightly touched it and just said, if I could get from where I was then to where I'm now, your son is going to be just fine. She started to lose it at that. I gave her a 20% discount on all of the stuff she was buying and she left. I never saw her come in the store after that. I still think about her a lot. I really hope her son's doing better. Not me, but something I read a few months ago. I take care of the orchids in a floral store. Had a young woman come in, maybe in her early 20s. She was very sweet, attentive, wanted to know about everything we had, but eventually settled on an orchid. She was very excited about moving into a new home, had me help her find a flower that would brighten up the place. She listened very closely to the directions I gave her for caring for her new plant. It was a gorgeous plum white blossom, very hardy, even had me write them down for her. I used store stationery, even wrote my name in the card, told her to come see me if she had any questions at all. About a month and a half later, an older man comes in with the orchid, possibly her father. He'd seen my name, the name of our store on the card, brought it back to us. The young woman had passed away in an accident shortly after moving. He didn't know how to care for the plant. It was in great shape. I could tell she'd been taking good care of it, but he didn't want anything to do with it. He asked me to refund it, put it back on the shelves, as even with the directions he wasn't sure he could take care of it. Even if he could, he didn't want it around. I think it reminded him of her too much. I have a small amount of oversight in the department, so I managed to trade him the orchids for a funeral bouquet that was worth a lot more. I was supposed to put the orchid back on display, but I couldn't bear to. I got permission to bring it home with me, but even with all the care I gave it, it died a couple weeks later. I don't know if flowers can miss people, but part of me likes to think this one did. Edit. The original poster was you/Luca_edit2. When I first read this, I immediately copy pasted it and sent it to a friend. That's why it's in word for word. I apologize for being too lazy to look for the original author before posting. I used to work at a local jewelry store, and it was nice seeing all of the happy couples. It didn't hurt that the job paid really well too. Of course, we occasionally had guys come in returning rings from girls who had told them no. Most of them were fairly pissed. But this one guy, I'll never forget him. I saw him pull up into the parking lot, so I walked away from my computer and went over towards the door to help him out. When he came in, he just sat there in his car for so long that I started to get pissed off that I had left my computer. It was winding down to be the end of a long day, and I was considering locking the door because it was time to close, but I wanted that money, so I said I would give him a few more minutes. He finally came in, looking down at the ground. I couldn't really see his face, but his ears were blood red. He put 3 rings down on the counter, an engagement ring, and 2 wedding rings, his and hers, and a few wrinkled wet receipts. I didn't really know what to say. I finally just asked, "Return." I went through all the return stuff and he never said a word. I told him we didn't have the cash on hand, but if he wanted to come back tomorrow we would have it. He just turned around and walked out. I tried to stay calm, but that guy had me freaking out. He was still sitting in his car when I closed up the shop, and it took me some time, but I finally worked up the nerve to go over and ask if he was alright. I knocked on his window and he started his car and drove away, and I almost fell down trying to not get hit. He never came back to get his money, and I avoided the news because I was afraid of what I would see. I put in my 2-week notice a few weeks later. That place did not make me happy anymore. Not sad, but just taking the piss. I worked in a cafe takeaway on a beautiful beach in South Devon, UK. One day I could hear a group of men and women verbally abusing a rather shy and timid girl who worked with us. I left the kitchen to ask if everything was okay and sent her back inside. Their problem, which apparently required 4 grown adults to shout and swear at her 18-year-old girl, was that all 4 of them had bought burgers and fries, and all 4 of them didn't wish to have any ketchup in their buns. The menus clearly signposted what comes with the burgers, and that we'll do them without ketchup, or whatever. If you ask, these 4 had actually eaten more than half of their food already, including the ketchup, and were aggressively demanding not only new burgers, which if they'd been nice about we probably would have done for them, but also new fries each, because all of them had put their fries in the burgers and got ketchup on them, and new drinks, because by the time their new food came they would have finished them. And to top it off, asking for their money back to our ketchup had ruined their day. And who did we think we were querying? Why they are asking for their money back and food for free? I took their remaining food and binned it, gave them their money back, and suggested we couldn't provide them the level of service they wanted, so would not be selling them anything for the remainder of the day. I worked in an upscale department store, selling handbags. Most of ours started at $200+ An early 20s woman and her mom, probably mid-50s, coming together. The young woman pulls me aside and tells me her mom sacrificed everything to raise her alone, working 2 jobs to put her through the local prep school rather than public school, and then to put her through college so daughter could focus on her studies. Now daughter had graduated and recently landed a great job and had come home to visit mom and take her out for the day. She wanted to buy mom a beautiful purse to take to church, as mom had denied herself anything nice for so long because she'd given everything for the daughter that mom was so reluctant to let her daughter buy her anything, but finally caved in, and they chose a classically styled bag for about $250. Nice construction, well suited to her style, and the kind of thing that always looks good. I wrapped it up in tissue and a box and packed it carefully in a shopping bag. A few days later, the mom came back with the bag, and inside was the purse still wrapped, just as I had done it. She felt so guilty accepting the gift from her daughter, and told me to just credit the daughter's account. I processed the return, but wished she could have understood the sheer happiness and joy I'd seen in her daughter's face when she had made the purchase, when she could finally start to repay her mom for her sacrifices. I'm late to the party, but here's one. It wasn't a return, but I had a customer come up to my cake case, generally grumpy and giving me the side eye and such. She stared at the case for a while and then demanded to know if I had a chocolate in stock. I put on my best cheerful face and grabbed the only one I had out of the freezer for her. I explained that it was one of our better vendor cakes, and as I got to the price her face dropped. She looked at me and tearfully explained that she couldn't afford it. It was her birthday and her husband, who has just passed, had always bought her this type of cake for her birthday, but she didn't have enough for it that day. I can't even describe the pain I saw in this lady's face. I immediately jumped behind the counter and calmed it, wrote her name on it, and threw in a candle. When I explained what I was doing, she burst into tears and hugged me, took her cake, and went about her business. She still comes in about once a month to see me. RV, she's doing much better. She's even brought her kids in to meet me. I use this one to remind me that you never know what someone has going on, and a little kindness goes a long way. Worked in an adult novelty store for a while one time after a deployment overseas, just to have a slacker job I didn't have to stress over. Anyway, adult novelty items cannot be returned or exchanged due to health codes and other laws, and really it's just plain Nike. So unless it's an actual manufacturer defect, it's not happening. So one day a rather portly gentleman came in wanting to return a strap-on purple vibrating jelly dong. Said it smelled funny. Couldn't help myself from asking if his wife had washed it after using it on him. Okay, customer service isn't my strong point. I had personally sold it to him the day before and fully explained the no return policy to him, and even told him that jelly dongs smell funny because of the material they are made of. Here is a tip for you: don't buy jelly dongs. They are sheet material, they break down quickly and harbor bacteria. Go silicone or Pyrex glass. So I wasn't feeling too bad about it. The sad part is that it wasn't cheap, and it was obviously never used. So if the man had simply listened to me in the first place, he would have saved a nice chunk of change and his evening. Not to mention his time and frustration trying to bring it back. The takeaway here is to buy quality and listen to the salesman when he isn't trying to upsell you, because he doesn't get commission or have sales quotas and doesn't give a shit if you buy something or not. If you are going to buy right. And jelly dongs are garbage, not even good for dog toys. Okay, especially not good for dog toys. An elderly woman came through my till with a cart full of used landscaping power equipment and other related things. She was very soft-spoken and seemed sensitive, so I tried to be very gentle about asking her why she wanted to return the items that had clearly been used. The store I worked for had a no returns on used outdoor power equipment rule. She looked at me with a world of pain on her face and opened her mouth to speak, but no word came out. She tried again, and it was just a soft whisper that I couldn't hear over the din of the store, so I gently asked her what she said. She spoke up a little louder and said that the reason why she was returning these things was because her husband of 50+ years had bought them 2 weeks before, intending on doing a landscaping job for their new acreage, and then he died a day or 2 before she had come to the store to do the return. She started sobbing deeply from her chest and getting terrified of where her life would be next. She was gasping something about not knowing what to even do with the acreage or the yard without him, and how it was so sudden. Her pain was so raw and visceral that it brought me to tears, and we ended up hugging it out. I ended up processing the return for her despite it being against company policy, and had to take the fall for it later when my boss cornered me. I worked in a cell phone store when I was in my late teens. This incredibly sweet grandma came in and bought a mid-range Android device on a talk and text plan for her teenage grandson. It was his Christmas present. Her daughter, the kid's mother, kept saying, "Are you sure you can afford it?" and such. From their conversation at the counter, I gather that the grandmother is a widow who is barely scraping by on government pension. She's already making sacrifices in her own life just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. She's strapped, and she just signed a multi-year contract for a cell service she can't afford. But she loves her family, and she wants to do something nice for her only grandson. She can't be dissuaded. After Christmas, she comes in with the grandson and the phone. He's making snotty remarks about the quality of the device, the cheapness of the plan, etc. All his friends have this or that. He's always so hard done by. They are refunding the device and exchanging it for an iPhone on a premium data plan. I'm looking into this old woman's face as I'm ringing everything in. I know that this is several $100s she doesn't have and a monthly obligation she can't afford. I can read the conflict in her eyes and the shame and the fear. He doesn't see any of it. It broke my heart. Several years ago, my husband was a manager at a department store that was famous for going out of their way to help the customer, especially when it came to returns. I think their employee motto was something like "Yes, I can." The store was a new location and had moved into a building that had very recently been occupied by a completely different department store that had gone bankrupt. The old store was much bigger than the new one, had sold furniture, and had a full automotive department. The new store was just closed and home goods. A few days after the new store opened, an elderly woman came in, struggling to roll a very large tire up to the customer service counter. She produced a receipt and explained that the other 3 tires were in the back of her car, had never been used, and she'd like to return them. My husband said they tried to explain that the store she'd bought them at went out of business, and the little old woman broke down crying. She said that she had bought the tires as a gift for her husband, a surprise because he badly needed new tires on his truck, but that he had died suddenly before he could even get them installed. She said they had no insurance or savings, and that she needed to return the tires so she could pay her husband's cremation fee. My husband said she kept sobbing, "Can you please just give me a refund? Please?" I was crying when my husband told me what happened. I asked him, "What did you tell her?" His answer, "Yes, I can." He said that after the fact, the employees offered to pull together the cost of the refund so corporate wouldn't fire my husband. But he said whatever happens, he'd be willing to weather the storm. In the end, corporate got a call from the woman. She spoke glowing of the service at the store, thanked them immensely for being one of the few customer-friendly companies left in the world, and explained what it meant for her to be able to bring her husband's ashes home. Apparently it made a huge impression on them, because my husband got some kind of customer service recognition reward and a really good raise at his next review. When he left the company a few years later, those 4 tires were still stacked in a corner of the warehouse. He said it was a good reminder of what their motto meant. For about 6 months right out of school, I worked in a plus-size women's clothing store in my town. Every single Sunday, without fail, we'd get a visit from a trans lady, we'll call her G, who would come look around and usually buy something. We all got on really well with her, and she would always come in with some crazy funny story to tell us. 3 weeks went by, and we didn't see her. We mentioned it once in conversation, but someone said they thought she talked about going on holiday somewhere, so we weren't too worried. The Sunday of that 3rd week, this guy comes in looking like he's about to burst into tears and asks if he can return something bought longer than a month ago. My colleague looks into the bag, and in there is this dark blue dress in G's size that she'd bought around 5 weeks earlier. We asked the guy if it was G's, and he said that she'd killed herself 2 weeks earlier. Turns out he was her brother and the only member of her family that would have anything to do with her, so it fell to him to sort through all of her stuff. We offered him the money back for the dress, but he wouldn't take it. I think he just needed somebody to talk to about it. Several years ago I was a member of a charity that provided Christmas presents for children of families who could not afford presents. I also worked for the retailer that a huge portion of the gifts were purchased from. One evening during my shift I was called to the front to authorize a large return without a receipt. When I got to the counter to address the woman who was returning items, she had already chosen items for exchange. Her selection included an adult-sized camouflage jacket, lingerie, a foot spa and perfume. When I asked what was being exchanged, she called to her 8-ish son to push the cart forward with 2 huge black bags in the basket. When the gifts were ready for the parents to pick up from the charity, we would put them in large black garbage bags, because often parents couldn't find childcare and this was a way to hide the gifts. I noticed the son crying and begging the mom not to take them back. I immediately went into rage mode, the kind I was allowed, and still keep my job, and told that mother that those were gifts meant for her children, not for use as an element to fund her and her boyfriend gifts. Not put as nicely. I saw a small smile on the boy, but deep down knew that he wasn't getting those gifts. I immediately called all the stores in the area and warned them of this situation. I worked in the ski/bike industry as a GM of a store. I had a gal come in, really upset about picking up her boyfriend's bikes. He had brought them in to have them worked on, went on to race the next day on his other bike, and had a massive heart attack while riding. died before he hit the ground. She had to come in to pay the balance and retrieve the bikes. I waived all the labor and parts fees and let her just dip with the bikes. It was rough. The guys working on them asked how the boyfriend was and how he did in the race. Then she broke down. Pretty terrible. I've also had ski equipment and snowshoes that were recently purchased returned to me because of older husbands or wives dying. Here's a helpful suggestion. If you live at sea level and you haven't skied or gone MTN biking in 20 years and maybe you're not physically fit, staying on top of your exercise, eating healthy, whatever, maybe don't fly to a state that is over a mile up in elevation. Travel to mountains and tax the hell out of your greasy arteries by doing something that's very physically demanding. Maybe I sound pissy about this, but I've seen it impact too many families. Edit. If you think I'm being mean, you haven't seen someone in cardiac arrest that is receiving chest compressions while getting pushed through a crowded ski school line of shocked and horrified kids, or had to deal with the families coming off the hill to go collect their loved ones. It's a huge juxtaposition. One moment you're having a once-in-a-lifetime vacation in Vail, the next you're in a hospital waiting room trying to figure out what happened. I know technically this part isn't retail, but retail and tourism go pretty hand in hand. I had a gentleman come into my store one day to buy an iPhone. After talking with him for less than a minute, he opened up and told me about how he had just been through a divorce where his wife cheated on him and left him with nothing. But somehow he seemed pretty joyous about buying a $950 phone. He then explains to me that the phone isn't for him but his girlfriend. My spirits lift a bit, thinking, wow, thank goodness he found someone. I hope things are on the up for him. After talking about how kind she is and how she travels the world buying art for different art exhibits at museums, he decides to show me a picture of her. The picture he shows me is probably the same Instagram model type picture we've all seen. A girl that could be no older than 16 or 18, with enough makeup to make her look flawless and more like an adult, posing with a bottle of sugar bear gummies for hair growth. The picture was literally a screenshot of her Instagram account, and he had more and embarrassingly said that they'd be inappropriate to show me since I'm at work. Thank goodness. I tried to turn the conversation away from the clearly fake girlfriend to anything I could think of. Too late. He went on to tell me about how sad it is that they've never met in person, but he knows that if he can get her the phone she wants, she can finally be able to call him and they can talk and hopefully finally meet. He bought an iPhone 6s Plus in rose gold 64GB with a protection plan, 3 cases and a screen protector. Over $1,000 worth of stuff. Then proceeded to pay with a check that he told me may not work because he hasn't gotten paid yet but wanted to try anyway. It worked, and that's the moment my heart broke. He left the store hugging me and told me that one day I'll find someone like he did. I watched another salesperson and a manager handle him when he came back into the store extremely upset and wanting his money back after being scammed. I don't think they could give him any money back since she kept everything. I turned my crazy into an opportunity. I was the manager of a shoe store. Had a guy come in with shoes that looked like they went to war. He was a postal worker and expected more from the shoes. If they were my shoes, I would have thrown them away. He had no receipt, but I knew they were ours. I told him about our policy. He told me he has been doing this for years, and once he calls the 1800 number they will tell me to exchange the shoes. So he asked if he could use our phone and called right in front of me. They asked to speak with me and told me to exchange the shoes. I asked why I was forced to enforce a policy they were not really enforcing. They said the policy is actually to service the customer. Give them a year, no questions asked. So I gave him his new shoes that evening. I meet with my staff and told them to stop upsetting customers. Accept the exchanges and service the customer. We created a sock exchange program. Our store became the best multiple pairs sold store in the US. We sold socks with a 1-year guarantee and blew customers' minds. We created a government program where we went to the jails on uniform days and sold boots and socks that were guaranteed to last until your next uniform allowance or you could exchange them. We went from a store with 12% multiple sales to 75% multiples. We went from $39,000 a month average sales to having 75k days. The word spread about how friendly we were to service providers that other officers and firemen started coming to us for their socks and shoes. About 5 years ago I had made a lot of money just before Christmas. I'm an escort, and I did a 36.5-hour call at 180/hour. I had to pay out fees to the agency, so it ended up working out to 115/h. A pretty decent sized chunk of money at once. I went off that Christmas, spoiling everyone rotten to make up for all my years as a deadbeat sister/daughter/aunt. I'm at the checkout at Walmart with a cart, loaded down with toys. There's a family ahead of me in line, a mom, dad, a 4-year-old boy, and a baby girl. The 4-year-old starts chatting with me and checking out the toys I was getting. He was fixated on this toy drum set. It was clear plastic with different colored rims for each drum, all nested together, so they made a rainbow. He asked who it was for, and when I said it was for my nephew, he said, "Wow, what a very lucky little boy." He was freaking adorable. I asked the dad if he could take the kids for a walk for 5 minutes. I then put the drums and a plush toy for the baby on the conveyor belt with their stuff and gave the mom more than enough to pay for it. She tried to refuse, but I said, "Please take it and say they're from Santa." I had an unexpected windfall and I can get my nephew something else. She thanked me profusely and told me they were having a hard time this year. Their baby was sick, and the dad was underemployed. The cashier starts ringing their stuff up, hiding the drums in a bag right away. The dad and kids get back. Their total comes up and they realize they don't have enough to cover it all. They had food, formula, diapers, and a few small toys that were presents for a friend's kid. They started taking items out, all the toys minus the 2 I put there, and some of the food, trying to do the embarrassing quick math of the downtrodden at the cash register. Been there, done that, 1,000 times. I butted in as politely as I could and told them to not take anything off the bill, and I paid the difference, which came to about $45. As the mom tearfully hugged me, I slid cash into her back pocket and told her to promise to get herself and her husband something too. The mom was the same age as me, mid-20s. After I was paid up, we stood chatting for as long as the kid could be entertained by all of us. The boy was so smart, well-spoken, and super expressive. Well-behaved too. We exchanged numbers, but we only talked on the phone once after that. I just felt weird, like I'd bought her friendship. I was also a heroin-addicted escort at the time, and she was a hard-working mom. I kinda ghosted her and told myself I was doing her a favor. I've since cleaned up, 2 years in Feb, and I still wonder how they're all doing. The phone that held their number, along with my purse and over $1,000 in cash, was stolen by a client at work a few months later. I can't even remember any of their names now. It's okay, though. Anonymous charity is the best kind. The less kudos you receive, the better out of all the gnarly, sad, terrible violent shit I've seen in my life. Watching those young parents debate about which essential items to jettison at the till was surprisingly heartbreaking. It put my own selfish struggle into perspective, for sure. Hopefully this story cheers you all up amidst a sea of broken marriages, unexpectedly lost loved ones, and tragically dead babies. Like there's any other kind of dead baby. I'm a dumbass. Thanks for reading, Reddit. Happy holidays, and if you're able to this year, spread the joy around as much as you can, with your money, your time, your understanding, and love.